In a small quiet town nestled between rolling hills and vast meadows, there stood an ancient willow tree. Its gnarled branches stretched wide, as if trying to protect the town from the world beyond. The townsfolk had long whispered about the tree, its roots entwined with forgotten secrets, and its leaves carrying the voices of those who had passed. Lena, a young woman in her late 20s, often found herself drawn to the tree, its quiet presence a comfort in a world that seemed to constantly shift beneath her feet. Her mother, who had passed away when Lena was just a child, had always spoken of the willow tree with reverence. The whispers beneath the willow carry the souls of those who still have something to say. Her mother would tell her, her voice soft and distant, as if the wind itself carried her words. Lena had always thought of her mother's words as mere folklore, stories to keep her grounded when the world felt too big. But as the years passed, as Lena found herself lost in the depths of grief and longing, the tree became her solace. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Lena would walk to the willow, sit beneath its sweeping branches, and close her eyes, hoping to feel the presence of her mother once again. One such evening, when the air was thick with the scent of rain and the ground beneath her feet felt soft, Lena settled beneath the willow's sheltering boughs. She sighed, her heart heavy with memories she could never quite escape. And then, she heard it, the faintest whisper. Lena! Her breath caught in her throat. It was her mother's voice, unmistakable, though softer than a memory. She opened her eyes, her gaze darting around, but the only thing she saw was the swaying of the willow branches in the wind. Mother! Lena whispered, barely believing her own words. Lena, my love. This time, the voice was closer. Lena's heart hammered in her chest. She could feel the warmth of the voice, as if her mother were right there, speaking into her ear. With trembling hands, Lena reached out and touched the bark of the tree, as if seeking the connection that had always eluded her. The tree's surface was smooth, its age hidden beneath layers of time, but it felt alive, pulsing with energy. Lena closed her eyes, listening intently. The voice continued, filled with sorrow and regret. Do not mourn for me, my dear. I was always here, always waiting for you. The willow keeps us together, even when the world tells you I am gone. Tears welled in Lena's eyes as she held her breath, trying to steady her emotions. The loss, the years spent wondering where her mother had gone, had been the weight of her heart for so long. But here, beneath the willow, it was as though the past and present had merged, and for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of peace. The tree, her mother's voice continued, was never just a tree. It holds the memories of those who loved, who grieved, who whispered their truths. It carries us when we can no longer walk. Lena felt the familiar ache in her chest, the deep yearning for more time, for more moments, for the chance to ask all the questions she had never dared to ask. I never got to tell you, she said, her voice trembling. I never got to tell you how much I missed you, how much I still need you. A soft sigh came from the tree, and the wind rustled the leaves around her. It was as if the willow itself was embracing her, carrying her sorrow into the branches. You've always been strong, my darling. You always knew how to carry the weight of this world. Now it's time to let go. Let go of the pain. The whispers will guide you forward. The love we shared will never fade. Lena sat there for what felt like hours, her tears now flowing freely, her heart swelling with a bittersweet kind of love. The sky had turned dark, and the stars above shimmered like distant beacons. The willow's whispers had faded, but the presence of her mother lingered, wrapping around Lena like a warm embrace. As she rose from the ground and stepped away from the tree, Lena felt lighter, as though a burden she hadn't even known she was carrying had been lifted. She glanced back at the willow, the ancient tree now standing silent and still, its branches bending low as if to say goodbye. And in that moment, Lena understood. The whispers beneath the willow were not just the voices of the past. They were reminders. The love of those we've lost never truly fades. It lives in the quiet moments, in the spaces where we allow ourselves to listen. Lena would never forget the willow, nor the voices it carried. And though she walked away from it that night, She knew that the whispers would always be there, waiting for her whenever she needed them. As she made her way home, the wind picked up, carrying with it a single leaf from the willow, drifting gently into her palm. She held it there, a piece of the past, a promise for the future, and the whisper of love that would never end. As Lena walked back toward her cottage, the quiet weight of the willow's words lingered in her heart. The leaves she had caught in her palm seemed to pulse with a faint warmth, as though they were alive, breathing with a purpose that was greater than herself. The night air had grown cooler, and the sound of crickets chirping filled the silence. But it was the soft murmur of the wind through the trees that kept drawing her thoughts back to the willow. For the first time in years, Lena didn't feel alone. She didn't feel the crushing weight of grief or the hollow emptiness that had followed her through the years after her mother's death. The willow had given her something more than comfort. It had given her understanding. She could still feel her mother with her, in the rustling of the leaves, in the pulse of the earth beneath her feet. Her mother had never truly left, but the feeling of peace was fleeting. As Lena passed the last of the town's houses, the street lamps casting long shadows on the cobbled road, something else began to weigh heavily on her chest. The truth her mother had spoken so softly about, the need to let go of the pain, to release the sorrow, was easier said than done. Her thoughts turned to the moments that had led her here, the pain of growing up without the warmth of her mother's presence, the years spent in silence, nursing a wound that seemed to never heal. There had always been an emptiness in Lena, a space where her mother's love was meant to be, but it had been replaced with the quiet ache of absence. She'd never been able to fill it until now. The willow had given her something to hold on to, but the question still lingered. How could she move forward without letting go of everything that had defined her? The path to her cottage seemed longer tonight, as though the distance between her and the world had grown wider. When she finally reached the small, cozy home she had grown up in, Lena paused at the doorstep. Her hand hovered over the door, but she couldn't bring herself to enter. The house felt too still, too quiet. It had always been her sanctuary, but tonight, it felt like a cage. She walked around the back of the house, toward the garden that her mother had lovingly tended for years. The roses that bloomed in vibrant reds and pinks were beginning to wither with the changing seasons, their petals falling like fragile memories. The moonlight cast a silver sheen over everything, making the garden look almost ethereal, as if it belonged to another world entirely. Lena knelt by the rosebush, her fingers brushing the fading petals. Her mother's presence was strong here too. This had been her mother's favorite place, where she would sit for hours, nurturing the flowers, talking to them as if they could understand. Lena could almost hear her mother's voice now, soft and soothing, humming an old lullaby as she worked. But the song had grown silent. "Mother," Lena whispered, her voice trembling, "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to move on without you." She buried her face in her hands, her heart breaking all over again. It felt impossible, the weight of the years pressing down on her, suffocating her with the realization that she had never truly let go. A soft rustling sound behind her made Lena look up sharply. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure, faint, shrouded in shadow, standing at the edge of the garden. Her heart skipped a beat, but when she blinked, the figure was gone, as if it had never been there at all. Lena stood up, her legs unsteady. She scanned the garden, but there was no one. The feeling of being watched, however, lingered, and a sudden chill ran down her spine. She shook her head, pushing away the unease that crept into her mind. It was probably just the wind, or her own fatigue playing tricks on her. But as she turned to head back toward the house, she heard it again. The whisper, soft and distant, like the rustling of leaves. But this time, it wasn't just the wind. "Lena." The voice was faint but unmistakable, her mother's voice. Lena froze, her breath catching in her throat. She glanced around frantically, but there was no one in sight. The garden was as still as the night sky above it. The whisper came again, this time clearer, more urgent. "Lena, don't be afraid." With a trembling hand, Lena reached into her pocket and pulled out the leaf she had taken from the willow tree. It had remained warm in her palm, though the night had grown cold. She stared at it, as though it held the answers to all the questions that plagued her. "Mother," Lena whispered, her voice cracking. "What's happening?" The wind picked up again, swirling around her in a sudden gust. The trees creaked and groaned as though they were trying to speak, their branches swaying wildly. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. A soft glow appeared in the distance, near the edge of the garden where the willow tree should have been. But the willow was far beyond the boundary of her garden, miles away on the other side of the town. Lena's heart raced as she stepped closer to the light, her footsteps tentative but filled with a sense of purpose she couldn't explain. With each step, the glow grew brighter, casting an ethereal light over the garden. When she finally reached the source, Lena gasped. The willow tree, her mother's willow, stood right before her, as though it had crossed the distance between them without her noticing. The ancient tree towered over her, its branches stretching out like welcoming arms, the same whispers from before now flowing freely on the wind. And beneath it, standing in its shadow, was the figure from earlier. A figure she recognized instantly, though it couldn't be real. Her mother stood before her, not as a memory or a shadow, but as though she had stepped out of time itself. Her face was soft, glowing in the moonlight, her eyes full of the same love Lena had always remembered. "Mother," Lena whispered again, her voice trembling with disbelief. Her mother smiled, and it was a smile that carried all the warmth of the years they had lost. "It's time, Lena," she said, her voice gentle yet filled with an unspoken understanding. "It's time for you to let go." Lena's breath caught in her throat as tears filled her eyes. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry, to reach out or run. But the warmth of her mother's presence pulled her closer, urging her to accept what had always been true, that the love they shared had never truly been severed. It had only waited for the right moment to return. With trembling hands, Lena reached out toward the figure of her mother, and as their fingers touched, the world seemed to hold its breath. And then, everything changed. The whispers beneath the willow swirled around her like a storm, carrying her mother's voice, her mother's love, and the promise of peace. The pain she had carried for so long, the grief that had followed her through every step of her life, began to fade. It was not gone, but it was lighter, softer, and in its place, Lena felt something more profound, a sense of release, of reconciliation. As she stood there, holding the memory of her mother in her heart, Lena understood. The willow was not just a place of whispers. It was a bridge, a connection between the living and the lost, a reminder that love never truly disappears. And with that understanding, Lena knew it was time to step forward, to live her life with the love she had carried all these years, but also with the freedom to move beyond the past. Her mother's figure faded with the morning light, but her presence remained, eternal in the whispers of the willow. The morning light began to break through the trees, casting soft rays of gold across the garden as Lena stood, rooted to the spot where her mother had stood just moments before. The ethereal glow had dissipated with the first hint of dawn, but the air still felt heavy, imbued with the warmth of something greater than herself. Lena's fingers still tingled from where she had touched her mother's hand, and she instinctively pressed them to her chest, as though trying to hold onto the feeling of that brief, beautiful moment. The wind had died down, leaving the garden still and peaceful, but the whispers of the willow, the voices that had been so faint and distant, now seemed louder in her heart, urging her to listen. She stood there for a long time, her mind a swirling tide of emotions, each wave crashing with new clarity. The grief she had carried for so long wasn't gone, nor was it suddenly less painful. But it was no longer the all-consuming darkness it had once been. In its place was a new kind of understanding, a quiet acceptance of the love that would always remain. And as the first rays of sunlight touched the earth, Lena knew it was time to begin. Time to step beyond the shadow of loss and into the light of the life her mother had wanted for her. As she turned to head back toward the house, her eyes fell upon the rosebush where she had knelt moments earlier. The flowers, once fading and fragile, seemed to stand taller, their colors richer, more vibrant as though touched by something miraculous. It was as if the garden itself was alive, responding to the shift in the air, to the change in Lena's heart. She stepped closer, brushing the leaves gently with her fingertips, her heart swelling with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "I'll make you proud, Mother," Lena whispered to the garden, her voice full of quiet promise. "I'll find my way." The day passed slowly, the sunlight spilling over the hills, bringing warmth and new life to the world around her. But Lena did not go back to her usual routine. Instead, she found herself drawn to the paths she had long ignored, the paths that had led her here, to this moment of understanding. She spent the day wandering the town, revisiting the places she had once known so well, but now viewed through the lens of her mother's love and wisdom. She spent time at the old bakery where her mother had once worked, talking to the baker who had known her for years. She visited the small chapel where she had said goodbye to her mother all those years ago, standing before the altar where the memories of her past were stored like old photographs. Each place, each conversation, felt like a step forward, as though she were reclaiming parts of herself that had been lost in the fog of grief. By the time the sun began to set, Lena found herself standing once more beneath the willow tree. Its branches swayed gently, and the air was thick with the scent of earth and leaves. The whispers, though faint, were there again, wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. As she sat down beneath the tree, Lena closed her eyes, allowing herself to sink into the stillness. She didn't feel the need to call out for her mother anymore. The connection was there, woven into the very fabric of the world around her. It was in the rustling of the leaves, in the soft murmur of the wind, in the warmth of the sun as it dipped below the horizon. And most of all, it was in her heart. Her mother had given her something invaluable that night. Not just the gift of peace, but the courage to live fully again, to embrace the future without fear, to love without holding back. She no longer needed to hold onto the past as a way of keeping her mother close. She had learned that love transcends time, that it is not confined to moments, but lives on in the quiet spaces, in the subtle reminders, in the whispers beneath the willow. Lena stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from her knees. She knew, in that moment, that her life had shifted. It would never be the same, but that was not a thing to mourn, it was something to celebrate. She was no longer the woman lost in grief, clinging to the shadows of the past. She was a woman reborn, with a heart full of love and the strength to carry on. She took a deep breath, her chest filling with a sense of calm that had eluded her for so long. As she turned to leave the willow behind, Lena knew she would carry its whispers with her always, and that, no matter where life led her, she would never truly be alone. Her mother's love, like the willow's roots, would remain with her, guiding her forward. And as Lena walked back toward her cottage, the moon rising high in the sky, the wind whispered once more softly, as though in approval. "You're ready, Lena. You're ready to live." And this time, Lena believed it. Lena walked back toward her cottage, the familiar path now feeling different beneath her feet. The earth seemed more alive, more attuned to her presence, as though the very soil was celebrating her new beginning. The moon above, full and bright, cast its silver light over the world, turning the familiar into something magical, something new. As she reached her doorstep, Lena paused. The garden, bathed in the soft light of the moon, seemed to hold a quiet reverence, as though the earth itself recognized the shift in her heart. The roses, their petals still delicate but now tinged with the vibrancy of life, swayed gently in the evening breeze. She glanced at the willow tree in the distance, its dark silhouette now just a shadow on the horizon. For the first time in years, Lena didn't feel the need to rush inside, to hide from the world. She stood there, savoring the stillness, letting the peace that had settled over her settle into every corner of her being. But something still tugged at her heart, a quiet longing, a question she hadn't yet fully answered. Her mother had given her so much that night, more than she could have ever imagined. But Lena realized she still had much to learn, much to discover about herself and the world around her. She could no longer hide behind the walls of grief, nor could she remain frozen in the past. Her mother's whispers had called her to let go of the pain, but they had also called her to live, to find new purpose, to make the most of the time she had left. Lena knew there were dreams she had put aside for too long, things she had once wanted, but had buried under the weight of her sorrow. The idea of moving forward felt both liberating and terrifying, but there was one truth she knew for certain now. She was ready. As she stepped inside her home, the warmth of the hearth greeted her. The fire, though small, flickered and crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The scent of herbs from the kitchen still lingered, a faint memory of the meals her mother had once prepared. Everything in this house was familiar, but for the first time it didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a place of beginnings, a place where she could finally breathe freely again. Lena moved to the small writing desk by the window, a dusty thing that had once been her mother's. There, scattered on its surface, were the journals Lena had kept over the years. They were filled with words, though many of them were too tangled with grief to make sense of. She ran her fingers over the leather-bound covers, the weight of them grounding her as her mind raced with thoughts of the future. There was a part of her that hesitated to open them. These journals had been a space for her sorrow, a way to preserve her memories of the past. But now, she knew they could become something else. They could be a record of the future, a testament to the woman she was becoming. With a quiet resolve, Lena opened the first journal, its pages yellowed with age. She began to write, her pen flowing freely across the page, as if the words themselves were waiting to be freed. She wrote about the willow tree, about the whispers, about her mother's love and the lessons she had learned. She wrote about the ache that had filled her heart for so long, and the joy that now began to take root in its place. The words came in a steady stream, each one carving away the last remnants of the grief that had once defined her. She wrote about the garden, about the roses, about how she had felt when she stood beneath the willow tree. It was as though, with each word, the bond between the past and present was reforged, not as something painful but as a source of strength. Hours passed without her realizing. The fire in the hearth had dwindled, and the moon outside had traveled higher in the sky. But Lena didn't stop writing. She felt as though the words were flowing through her, not from her mind but from somewhere deeper, somewhere sacred. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Lena closed the journal and placed the pen down, her heart full. She felt lighter, as though a burden had been lifted from her chest. And yet, at the same time, she felt more grounded than ever before. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel daunting. It felt like an adventure waiting to unfold. As she stood up from the desk, a soft wind stirred outside, ruffling the leaves of the trees. Lena walked to the window and gazed out into the world beyond. The town was still quiet, the houses nestled against the rolling hills, bathed in the early morning light. She could hear the soft calls of birds beginning their day, and the scent of fresh earth lingered in the air. In that moment, Lena knew she was ready to step into the world once more. Not as the woman she had been, defined by grief, but as someone new, someone who had learned to live again. The willow's whispers would always be with her, a reminder that the past was never truly gone, but that she was free to walk her own path, unburdened by sorrow. With a final glance at the house that had been her refuge, Lena stepped outside, her heart light, her spirit bold, and the first rays of the sun warming her face. The world stretched out before her, full of promise, full of possibility. And beneath the willow, the whispers of the past continued to dance in the wind, a song of love, loss, and the enduring strength of the human heart. Lena smiled, and for the first time in years, she felt at peace. The journey ahead would not be without its challenges, but she was no longer afraid. She was ready, and the willow would always be there, waiting for her whenever she needed to listen. Lena's footsteps echoed softly in the quiet streets of the town as she made her way toward the town square. The sky above was now painted with hues of pink and lavender, the first blush of morning breaking through the stillness. The air felt alive with possibility, a freshness that spoke of new beginnings. For years, she had avoided the bustle of the town. The sound of laughter, the hum of life, things she had once enjoyed, had all felt distant to her, like they belonged to another person. But today, something was different. The town no longer felt like a place of loss, a reminder of all the things she couldn't have. It felt like home, a place where she could breathe, where she could begin again. As she passed the old bakery, the door creaked open, and Mrs. Whitaker, the baker, stepped outside. Her apron was flour-splattered, and her cheeks flushed from the warmth of the oven. But when she saw Lena, her face broke into a smile, the kind that spoke of deep, unspoken understanding. "Lena," Mrs. Whitaker called, waving her hand. "I haven't seen you around in months. Where have you been hiding?" Lena stopped, surprised but grateful for the woman's warm reception. "I've been finding my way," she said, the words feeling right. "It's been a long road, but I'm back now." Mrs. Whitaker's eyes softened as she studied Lena's face. The lines of sorrow that had once defined her now replaced with something lighter, more open. "I'm glad to hear it," she said, stepping closer. "Your mother would be proud of you, Lena. You've always had her strength, her heart." Lena felt a lump form in her throat at the mention of her mother. It still hurt, the ache of her absence, but it was different now. It wasn't the crushing weight it once had been. Instead, there was something almost sacred in it, like a bond that could never be broken. "I hope so," Lena said, her voice quiet. "It's hard to imagine life without her, but I'm learning to live with it." Mrs. Whitaker nodded, her face filled with the wisdom of age and experience. "You're stronger than you know, Lena. We all have our burdens, but they don't define us. It's what we do with them that matters." Lena smiled, the words settling deep in her heart. "Thank you. I think I'm starting to see that." "Well, I'd love for you to come by later," Mrs. Whitaker said with a wink. "I've just baked a fresh batch of cinnamon rolls. Maybe you'll have time to sit and chat for a while." Lena's stomach grumbled at the mention of cinnamon rolls, but more than that, it was the invitation to reconnect with the people of her town that she found so comforting. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to be part of the community, to share in simple joys like a warm meal and the company of friends. "I'd love that," Lena replied, her smile genuine. "Thank you. I'll stop by later." They exchanged a few more words, and Lena continued her walk toward the town square. She passed the small chapel, its white walls bathed in the soft glow of dawn. The door was ajar, and inside, she could hear the soft murmur of voices. Perhaps the early service had already begun. Something stirred within her. It had been years since she had stepped inside, and the thought of returning felt both comforting and intimidating. She had always found peace within those walls, especially after her mother's death. But those visits had grown fewer and farther between as the pain of loss became too much to bear. Today, though, it felt different. She was different. Without thinking, Lena found herself walking toward the chapel, her feet guided by something deeper than reason. The door creaked as she pushed it open, and the scent of incense and wood greeted her. The cool air inside wrapped around her like an old, familiar friend. The soft glow of candles flickered on the altar, casting a warm light over the wooden pews. The sound of a hymn being sung by a few early worshippers echoed softly throughout the space. Lena hesitated at the threshold, uncertain. But then she took a deep breath and stepped inside, her presence barely noticeable in the quiet space. An older man, the town's priest, stood at the altar, his back to her as he led the congregation in song. He paused mid-verse when he noticed Lena standing at the back, his eyes widening slightly in recognition. "Well, if it isn't Lena," Father Thomas said, his voice warm and gentle. "It's been a long time." Lena nodded, her throat tightening. I didn't expect to come today, but I felt like I needed to." Father Thomas smiled softly, his eyes kind with the understanding of years spent helping others navigate their grief. "Sometimes, the heart knows what it needs before we even do." Lena took a seat at the back of the chapel, her hands folded in her lap. She closed her eyes for a moment, just listening to the soft melody of the hymn filling the space, the familiar words flowing over her like a balm. It wasn't the first time she had heard this song. It was one her mother had always loved. But today, it didn't stir the sadness it once had. It was soothing, comforting. Father Thomas finished the hymn, and the congregation fell silent, waiting for the next part of the service. But Lena stayed where she was, allowing herself to just be. The weight of the years seemed to fall away, and for the first time, she felt truly present in her own life. As the service came to a close, Father Thomas came to sit beside her, offering her a small, kind smile. "Would you like to join us for tea afterward?" he asked. "There's always room for one more." Lena glanced at the small group gathered around the altar, their faces warm and open, and she realized that, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged. The people here knew her, not just as the daughter of the woman who had once walked through these doors, but as herself, a woman with her own story, her own struggles, and her own strength. "I'd like that," Lena said softly, her voice full of quiet gratitude. "I'd really like that." After the service, Lena stayed with Father Thomas and the small group of townsfolk, sipping tea and exchanging stories. They asked her about her life, about what she had been doing, and Lena found herself talking more than she had expected. She spoke of her journey, of the willow tree, of the whispers of her mother that had guided her back to herself. As the evening wore on, Lena felt something shift within her. She wasn't just reconnecting with the town, she was reconnecting with herself. The woman who had been lost in the shadows of grief for so long was beginning to step into the light once more. And as she left the chapel later that night, the sky now deep with stars, Lena realized that this moment of peace, of acceptance, of love, was only the beginning. The journey ahead would not be without its challenges, but with each step she took, she would continue to grow, to heal, and to live. And beneath the whispers of the willow, she would always find the strength to carry on. For she was no longer just a woman mourning the past. She was a woman reborn, and the world ahead of her was wide open, full of possibility. As the weeks passed, Lena found herself gradually becoming a more active part of the life around her. The town that once felt so distant, so unreachable, was now a place where she could take part in the rhythm of life once more. Every corner, every street, held new meaning. Each day brought a new experience, an old acquaintance to reconnect with, a familiar face to share a laugh with, a task that brought a sense of purpose she had long forgotten. She visited Mrs. Whitaker's bakery regularly, enjoying the cinnamon rolls and the warm conversations. She took to walking the streets in the early mornings, letting the cool air stir her thoughts and breathe life into her tired spirit. The town had a way of making her feel like she was part of something bigger, something rooted in the earth and the cycles of the seasons. But as much as she felt herself blossoming again, Lena knew that the work of healing, of truly stepping into her life, was far from over. The whispers beneath the willow had given her the courage to face the past, but there was still much to understand. The garden she had tended to, the flowers and roses that had once seemed a distant memory, were now her solace, a space where she could reflect and grow in peace. One afternoon, while walking through the garden, Lena paused by the edge of the flower bed, her fingers brushing against the petals of the roses. She noticed a particular bud, one that was slowly beginning to bloom, and smiled. It reminded her of how she had once felt, closed off, hesitant, but on the brink of something new. Suddenly, a voice called from the gate, and Lena turned to find a familiar figure walking up the path toward her. "Thomas!" she exclaimed, her face lighting up. The man who stood before her was someone she hadn't expected to see. Thomas was a quiet figure in the town, known to be a bit of a wanderer, but he had a gentleness about him that made him approachable. He was tall, with dark hair and a gaze that seemed to see beyond the surface of things, always thoughtful and introspective. "Good afternoon," Thomas greeted her with a slight nod, his eyes soft with familiarity. Lena smiled, a little surprised at his presence. "What brings you here today?" Thomas glanced around at the garden, his eyes flickering to the roses. "It's peaceful here," he said quietly, his voice calm but carrying a hint of something deeper. "I've passed by many times, but I've never stopped to see it up close." Lena, noticing his genuine interest, gestured for him to join her by the flowers. "It's been a place of comfort for me, especially lately. I've found that it helps to have a space where you can just breathe without all the noise of the world." Thomas nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I can understand that," he said, his voice low but warm. "Sometimes the world is loud. It's hard to hear what matters when it's so chaotic." Lena looked at him for a moment, sensing that his words held more weight than he let on. Thomas wasn't just a man passing through the town. He was someone who, like her, had his own past, his own burdens, his own quiet stories. "It's strange," Lena said after a pause. "For so long, I couldn't see past the grief. I thought I'd be stuck there forever. But now—" She paused, the words feeling different on her lips, as if she were speaking a truth she had only just begun to understand. "Now I can breathe again. It's as if the pieces are slowly falling into place, like the world's beginning to make sense again." Thomas looked at her with a softness in his eyes. "I think that's a beautiful thing," he said, his voice low but warm. "I think sometimes you have to lose yourself to find what you're really meant to be." Lena's heart gave a small, grateful flutter. She knew what Thomas meant. It was the same journey she had been on. A journey through loss, through pain, through the dark, only to emerge on the other side, stronger and more whole than she had ever been before. They stood in silence for a while, the sounds of the garden filling the space between them. Birdsong, the rustling of leaves, the soft murmur of the wind. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of amber and gold. It was a moment of quiet reflection, the kind that carried a weight that didn't need to be spoken aloud. After a while, Thomas broke the silence, his voice softer than before. "I've been thinking about leaving town," he said, his gaze distant. "I've wandered so many places, but something keeps pulling me back here. I think I'm meant to stay for a while, though I don't know why." Lena looked at him, sensing that Thomas was at a crossroads of his own, just as she had been not so long ago. "Sometimes, the right place finds you when you least expect it," she said. "Maybe you're meant to be here, too." Thomas smiled faintly, his gaze meeting hers. "Maybe," he agreed. There was a pause, and Lena felt a quiet connection forming between them, an understanding that neither of them needed to explain. Life had a way of pushing people together when they needed each other most, and Lena couldn't help but wonder if this was one of those moments. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you'd like," she said, her voice gentle but sincere. "I'd like to have someone to share this garden with." Thomas seemed to consider her offer for a moment, then nodded. "I think I'd like that." The two of them spent the rest of the evening talking quietly by the roses, sharing stories of their lives, of their journeys. The conversation ebbed and flowed naturally, as if they had known each other far longer than they truly had. It was easy, comforting, and for Lena, it felt like the beginning of something new. Another chapter in her life she hadn't anticipated. As the night fell and the stars began to twinkle above, Lena found herself feeling more connected than ever. The garden, the town, the people. Everything that had once felt like it was slipping through her fingers now seemed to be coming together, forming a tapestry of hope and healing. Lena had come to realize that healing wasn't a destination, but a journey. And along the way, there were always new connections to be made, new stories to be shared, and new beginnings to embrace. With Thomas by her side, she felt a quiet strength blossoming within her, just like the roses in her garden. It wasn't the end of her story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one where she could step fully into the future, surrounded by the people and the life she had once feared losing forever. And beneath the whispers of the willow, the promise of peace and healing echoed softly, as if to say, "You are not alone. You are ready to live." The days turned into weeks, and Lena's connection with Thomas deepened, like the slow growth of ivy creeping up a sturdy wall. They shared more moments in the garden, their conversations ranging from lighthearted chatter to quiet, vulnerable reflections. Thomas, though reserved, had a way of listening that made Lena feel seen and understood. His presence had a calming effect, like the stillness of a forest after a storm, and Lena found herself drawn to the peace he exuded. One afternoon, as the sun began to set and the orange glow stretched across the sky, Lena found herself sitting on the bench beneath the willow tree, watching the wind make the leaves dance. Thomas had been working on repairing the old fence at the edge of her property, and she had been helping him when she could, though the work was much easier for him. He was the kind of man who could fix almost anything, his hands steady and sure, like the solid, reliable earth beneath them. "Lena," Thomas said, pausing in his work and walking toward her. His voice was softer than usual, and she could tell he had something on his mind. "There's something I've been thinking about." Lena looked up, her brow furrowed in curiosity. "What is it?" He hesitated for a moment before continuing, his eyes searching hers. "I've been feeling like I should tell you more about myself, about why I've come here, why I stay in places for a while and then leave without warning." He sat beside her on the bench, the distance between them suddenly feeling smaller. "You've opened up to me, Lena, and I think it's only fair that I do the same." Lena felt a pang of something deep inside, a quiet acknowledgement that their bond was shifting into something more profound. She nodded, her heart gently urging him to share, to trust her with whatever part of himself he had kept hidden. "You don't have to, Thomas. Only share what you're ready for." He sighed, leaning back and looking up at the branches above them, his fingers absently tracing the smooth wood of the bench. "I haven't always been someone who stays. I've moved around a lot, drifting between towns and cities, never staying in one place for too long. I thought I was looking for something, maybe peace, maybe purpose, but what I really wanted was to escape from the parts of myself that I thought would keep me from ever truly living." Lena listened intently, her heart aching with empathy. She had always sensed there was more to Thomas than met the eye, and now, as he spoke, the layers of his story slowly began to unfold. "What were you running from?" she asked quietly, her voice filled with compassion. Thomas's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw the vulnerability that had been hidden beneath his calm exterior. "I lost someone I loved," he said simply, "someone who meant everything to me. I couldn't stay in the place where I had memories of them, so I kept moving. I thought I could outrun the pain." Lena's heart broke for him, understanding all too well what it felt like to carry such a weight. "You don't have to run anymore, Thomas," she said softly, her voice a gentle reassurance. "You found a place where you can stay, a place where you don't have to leave the past behind, but where you can heal from it." He looked at her then, his expression a mixture of surprise and something deeper, something tender. "You make it sound so simple, but I'm afraid of staying too long, afraid that I'll get hurt again." Lena's hand, almost instinctively, reached out and placed itself over his, offering a silent comfort. "It's not about avoiding the hurt, Thomas. It's about learning how to live with it, how to allow it to shape us into who we are meant to be. You don't have to have all the answers, and you don't have to walk this road alone." The air between them seemed to shift, and for a long while, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the soft rustle of the leaves and the distant calls of birds as they returned to their nests. It was a moment of shared understanding, an unspoken bond that deepened their connection. Finally, Thomas spoke again, his voice low and sincere. "I think I've been afraid of getting close to people because I didn't want to risk losing them again. But with you, Lena, I don't feel that fear as much. Maybe I'm ready to stay, to stop running." Lena smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. "You don't have to be afraid, Thomas. You don't have to carry it all alone anymore." They sat together for a while longer, not needing to fill the silence with words. The weight of their shared experiences hung in the air, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt like a promise, one of understanding, of acceptance, and of a new beginning. As the sky darkened and the stars began to twinkle above, Lena finally stood, stretching her arms toward the sky. "Come on," she said, offering Thomas her hand. "Let's go inside. I'll make us some tea. We've both got a lot of healing to do, but I think we can do it together." Thomas took her hand, his grip warm and steady. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling with a kind of happiness he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. "I think I'd like that." Together, they walked back to the house, the promise of the future unfolding before them. For the first time in a long time, Lena felt like she was no longer just surviving. She was truly living. And with Thomas by her side, she knew that whatever lay ahead, she wouldn't have to face it alone. And beneath the whispers of the willow tree, where the past and future met, a new chapter had begun. The days grew warmer as summer approached, bringing a renewed sense of life to the town. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers, and the streets felt more alive with the hum of voices and laughter. It was a season of growth, of new beginnings, and it felt like the perfect backdrop for the quiet, steady bond between Lena and Thomas. Each day, they found themselves spending more time together, working on the garden, fixing the fence, or simply walking through the town, sharing pieces of their lives. Thomas had become a fixture in the small community, a man who had once been a stranger, but now seemed like a part of the town's pulse. People had warmed to him, and for the first time, he wasn't moving through life with the weight of his past pushing him forward. He was staying, truly staying. Lena, too, found herself changing. The town that had once felt like a place to hide from the world now felt like home. It was where her roots were, where she could plant herself without fear. She still carried the shadows of her past, but they no longer defined her. She had learned that healing didn't happen in a straight line. It was more like the flow of a river, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but always moving forward. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch, watching the golden light of the setting sun spill over the hills, Lena turned to Thomas, her thoughts drifting to the future. "Do you ever think about what's next?" she asked, her voice soft as she adjusted the scarf around her neck. "What happens after we've done the healing we can do here?" Thomas looked at her, his expression thoughtful. He had become a man of few words when it came to the future. He'd always been someone who lived day to day, never wanting to commit to something that might slip away. But with Lena, something had shifted. He had begun to think about the possibility of a life that wasn't defined by escape, by running. A life where he could belong, where he could make choices not out of fear, but out of hope. "I've been thinking about it more," he said, his voice low and steady. "I've spent so much of my life avoiding the future, thinking I had to keep running, that I never allowed myself to imagine what it would be like to stay in one place. To really stay, not just physically, but emotionally." Lena nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. She had been running too, not in the physical sense, but in the way she had distanced herself from everything: love, connection, even the people who cared about her. Now, with Thomas by her side and the town becoming her anchor, she could see a future that didn't feel like a burden. "I think it's time for us to stop running," she said, her voice steady with certainty. "Maybe we're both here for a reason, not just to heal but to create something new, a life that's ours." Thomas studied her for a moment, and then he smiled. It wasn't the faint smile he had shared when they first met, but a smile that was full of warmth and acceptance. "I think I'd like that," he said softly. "I think I'm ready to build something with you." Lena's heart fluttered at his words. She had been afraid to say them out loud, to admit that she wanted more, that she was ready for more. But with Thomas, there was no fear, only trust. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow across the landscape, Lena reached out and took his hand. They sat there in silence for a while, the only sound the gentle breeze rustling through the trees. It was a moment of peace, a moment of quiet promise that the future, whatever it held, was something they could face together. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Thomas and Lena began to make plans, small ones at first. More work on the garden, a new room to be added to the house for guests, a community event they were organizing to celebrate the changing seasons. They had found their rhythm, a life that was full of quiet contentment and shared purpose. But as much as they were both learning to embrace the present, the past was never too far behind. Late one evening, when the house was quiet and the stars had filled the sky, Lena sat in the kitchen, a cup of tea warming her hands as she gazed out the window. Thomas was out by the fence, finishing up the last of the repairs before the rains came. She had a feeling, though, that the past was about to catch up with them, just as it had so many times before. She wasn't sure what it would mean, but she knew that whatever happened, she wouldn't be facing it alone. The journey ahead was theirs to walk together, one step at a time. As she sat there in the quiet, her thoughts turned to the willow tree, the one that had stood in the center of her garden, a silent witness to everything that had come before. The tree had always seemed to whisper to her, even when she hadn't been ready to listen. Now, the whispers had changed, from sorrowful sighs to something more peaceful, more accepting. The willow wasn't just a symbol of grief anymore. It was a symbol of growth, of change. And so, beneath the soft rustle of the willow's leaves, Lena made a promise to herself. She would no longer run. She would live, truly live, in the place she had chosen, with the people who had become her family. The future was still unknown, but for the first time in her life, Lena was ready to face it, whatever it may bring. And with Thomas by her side, there was no fear left, only the quiet confidence of two souls who had found their way home. The days stretched into a peaceful rhythm, and with each passing moment, Lena and Thomas grew more intertwined in each other's lives. The town, once a place of solitude for Lena, had become the foundation of something more: a life, a community, and a shared future. And though they found joy in the small, everyday moments, there was still a lingering question that hung between them, one that both of them had been avoiding. It was one evening, as the warm glow of twilight bathed the garden, that Thomas finally brought it up. They were sitting together on the porch, a basket of freshly picked herbs between them, when he spoke. "Lena," he began softly, his voice steady but carrying a weight. "We've talked a lot about what we want, what we're building together, but there's something I haven't shared. Something from my past that I think it's time you know." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had known, deep down, that this moment was coming. The past, no matter how far we run from it, always has a way of catching up. She had faced it herself, in pieces, and now it seemed Thomas was ready to do the same. The question was, how would this change everything they had built so far? She turned toward him, meeting his gaze, her voice quiet but firm. "You don't have to tell me, Thomas. But if you're ready, if it's something you need to share, I'm here. I've seen you carry this weight, and I'm not afraid of it." Thomas swallowed, the conflict clear in his eyes. He had never been one to share much about his past, but he could feel the pull of honesty. The fear of losing what they had was still there, but it had lessened with time. He needed Lena to know who he was, the full truth, not just the parts he had allowed her to see. "I wasn't always the man I am now," he said slowly, as if each word was a burden to lift. "Before I came here, before I met you, I was someone who hurt people. Not physically, never that, but in the way I kept running, in the way I never let anyone close. I pushed away the people who loved me because I couldn't face the consequences of my own choices." Lena listened, her breath catching in her throat. She knew what he meant: the distance, the avoidance, the walls people built to shield themselves from the consequences of their actions. And yet, she could see the raw honesty in his eyes, the vulnerability he had never shown anyone before. "There was a woman," he continued, his voice tightening, "someone I loved deeply, but I ran from her. I left without warning, thinking I was protecting her from the darkness I carried. I thought that if I kept moving, I could erase the mistakes I'd made, but I couldn't. I can't." Lena's heart went out to him, understanding his struggle all too well. She reached out, placing her hand over his, a gesture of solidarity and support. "I'm sorry," Thomas said quietly, his eyes filled with regret. "I thought I could outrun the pain, but I've learned that you can't outrun your own heart." Lena squeezed his hand gently, her voice soft but steady. "You don't need to apologize, Thomas. I don't judge you for your past. We all carry our own ghosts. What matters is how we choose to live now. You've chosen to stay, to build a life here with me. That's what matters." His eyes searched hers as if looking for something, a sign that she still saw him, that she still believed in them. And in that moment, Lena knew what she needed to say. "I've been running too, Thomas," she admitted. "Not physically, but in my heart. I shut myself off from the world because I was afraid of losing again. But now, here with you, I can feel myself opening up again. We both have pasts, things that could tear us apart, but I'm not afraid anymore. I believe in us." Thomas smiled, his relief almost palpable, though the weight of his confession still lingered. I've never met anyone like you, Lena. Someone who could accept me for everything I am, even the parts one hate. Lena smiled back, her heart swelling with a mix of love and gratitude. You don't need to hate those parts of yourself. They've made you who you are. And who you are now is the person I want to share my life with. The air between them felt lighter now, the tension that had once hung heavy finally starting to dissolve. They had faced their pasts, their fears, and had chosen to move forward together. And in that choice, they had found something stronger than either of them could have imagined. A bond that wasn't based on perfection but on acceptance and growth. As the night settled in, Thomas reached for Lena, pulling her into a gentle embrace. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the sound of his presence grounding her in a way nothing else ever had. "I'm glad I stayed," he whispered, his voice filled with a quiet certainty. "I'm glad I found you." Lena smiled, her arms tightening around him. "Me too, Thomas. Me too." The willow tree, standing tall and proud in the garden, seemed to whisper in the night air. Its branches swayed gently in the breeze, the rustling leaves a soft melody of peace. It had witnessed their struggles, their healing, and now it stood as a silent witness to their love. A love that was no longer defined by the past, but by the promise of a future they would create together. And beneath the whispers of the willow, the future felt wide open, full of possibilities. As the weeks passed, Lena and Thomas continued to build their life together, weaving a tapestry of shared moments, laughter, and quiet companionship. The small town, once just a place for them to hide, had transformed into a home, a place where both of them could face their pasts and find solace in each other's arms. But life, as it often does, has a way of throwing the unexpected into even the most peaceful of worlds. One evening, as autumn painted the world in shades of red and gold, a stranger arrived in town. He was an older man, his face lined with years of hard travel, his eyes shadowed with secrets. He entered the local tavern, a place where townsfolk gathered to share stories and laughter after a long day's work. But the moment he stepped inside, the room fell into an uneasy silence. Lena, who had been sitting near the window, watching the evening sky turn dark, noticed him immediately. There was something about the way he moved, the way he looked at the people around him, as though he was searching for something, or someone. And then, as if by instinct, her eyes met Thomas's across the room. There was a subtle tension in his gaze, a flicker of recognition in his expression, something Lena couldn't place. But it was enough to make her heart race with sudden anxiety. The stranger's gaze landed on Thomas, and a strange stillness descended over the room. The air between them seemed to crackle, charged with unspoken history. Lena stood up slowly, her pulse quickening. She could feel the weight of something shifting in the air, something from Thomas's past that had come looking for him, seeking answers, or perhaps seeking something else. "Thomas?" she called, her voice laced with uncertainty. He didn't answer right away. He remained rooted to his seat, his gaze locked with the stranger's, as if frozen in time. But then, slowly, he stood, his movements deliberate. He gave her a soft, reassuring look before he began walking toward the stranger. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she followed them, her feet moving before her mind could catch up. The stranger hadn't taken his eyes off Thomas. But now, as Thomas approached him, the man finally spoke. "Well, if it isn't Thomas," the man said, his voice gravelly but filled with recognition. "I knew I'd find you eventually." Lena felt a chill crawl up her spine. This man, who was he? And what did he want with Thomas? Thomas's face was unreadable, but there was a hardness to his jaw, a tension that Lena had never seen before. "I thought I made it clear that I wanted nothing to do with you, Victor," he said, his voice low but firm. Victor smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You can run from the past, Thomas, but it always catches up. Always." Lena's breath caught in her throat. She understood now. Victor was someone from Thomas's past, someone who knew the darker side of him, the side he had tried so hard to leave behind. "Lena?" Thomas said, turning to her, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and something else. something Lena couldn't quite read. I need you to trust me. I need you to believe that I am not that man anymore. This is a part of my past I thought I had left behind. Lena took a step forward, her voice steady despite the fear that clung to her. I believe in you, Thomas. I've seen the man you are now. I know who you are. Victor scoffed, his gaze flicking between them with a sneer. The past doesn't care who you are now. It only remembers who you were. Lena's heart clenched at his words, but she didn't back down. Maybe that's true, but we're not defined by the mistakes of the past. We choose who we become. Victor's smile faltered slightly, his eyes darkening. You're more like her than I thought. At that, Thomas's face went pale, and for a moment, Lena thought she saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. Fear of something much deeper than just the presence of an old acquaintance. What do you mean? Lena asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and caution. Victor's smile returned, this time colder. You think you've built something, but everything you've made is just a shadow of what's coming. Thomas can't escape what he's done, and neither can you. Lena felt the ground beneath her feet shift, the weight of his words pressing in on her chest. What did he mean? What was coming? Before she could say anything else, Victor turned and walked out of the tavern, his heavy boots echoing in the silence he left behind. The tension in the room remained long after he was gone, leaving an uncomfortable stillness that no one dared to break. Lena turned to Thomas, her heart racing. What did he mean by that? What's coming? Thomas stood there, his face pale, his eyes haunted. I don't know, but I think I've been wrong about something. Lena stepped closer, her hand gently reaching for his. What do you mean? He looked at her, his expression both troubled and resolute. I've been running from my past for so long, thinking I could outrun it. But now, I see that running isn't enough. I have to face it, Lena. I have to face what I did, who I was, and whatever it is Victor is talking about. Lena's heart twisted. She knew that whatever lay ahead, it wouldn't be easy. But she also knew one thing for certain. She would stand by Thomas, no matter what the future held. They had built something together, something strong and real, and nothing, not even the shadows of the past, could take that away. As the night fell over the town, a new chapter began to unfold. The whispers of the willow tree, once soft and peaceful, now felt like a warning, an echo of the past that could no longer be ignored. And as Lena and Thomas stood together in the quiet of the night, they both knew that the true test of their love and their future was just beginning.